You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, everyone, super excited about this week's episode. This is another episode that is long overdue. Brad and myself are both huge fans of Joel Larsgaard, who actually podcasts with his buddy Matt over at How to Money, a phenomenal podcast if you haven't already checked it out. And we're going to discuss a little bit of that story, but honestly, we're going to rewind and talk about his personal money story, because this is one that I think is so relatable for our audience. Put yourselves in the situation of someone that pursues a career or a job path, not because of how much it makes, but because you love it, because it lights you up. And you do that full well knowing, or maybe finding out after the fact, that it doesn't pay very much. Maybe you're making in the low 20s, whatever it is. How can you use pure hustle to fill in the gaps and thrive on your path to financial independence? This is going to be an incredibly valuable conversation for our audience. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. And yeah, this should be a lot of fun. It's cool actually getting to interview and dive deep with people that you and I have met before, right? We actually met Joel at Podcast Movement last year and then spent a bunch of time with him at this most recent FinCon with him and his buddy Matt from How to Money. And yeah, to actually get a chance to dive into his story. And it's incredibly fascinating. It's got a little bit of everything from frugality and savings to really starting your own business, both on the real estate side and on the internet/podcasting side. So I think this has got a little bit of everything. So with that, Joel, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Glad to be here.
So Joel, you are obviously speaking now to tens of thousands of people around the world about financial independence and the path to financial independence. But where did your money story begin?
I feel like the biggest thing that happened to me in my life that started making me think about money and be concerned about money. And I guess just, it probably actually was not healthy really in the beginning, my view towards money. And that was because growing up, my parents just weren't great with money. They're great people. They're literally the two people I admire the most in life and the people that I want to most be like, but they weren't good with money. And so, yeah, my parents actually filed for bankruptcy when I was 12 years old. And that changed everything. That changed the whole trajectory of my life and the way I approach money. I guess I just realized that when a couple doesn't know how to handle money well, it can lead to a lot of stress. It can lead to a lot of difficulty in family life. And I kind of saw that firsthand. And I said, you know what? That's not what I want for my family someday. It's really, really important for me to figure out the nuts and bolts of how I get my money act together so that money doesn't become an issue, someday when I get married and have kids.
Hey, Joel, at 12 years old, how do you have any sense of what's going on with the family finances? Obviously, I'm sure the word bankruptcy came up. What were your thoughts? Like, can you put yourself back in that space and tell me what the 12-year-old Joel was thinking? Like, I imagine there's anxiety and uncertainty, all these really essential feelings. Talk me through that if you can.
Yeah, sure. I have two sisters, and one is younger, one's older. And I feel like actually they were a little more, not oblivious, but they were just, it didn't affect them in the same way. And I think, my older sister, she was in high school. She was hanging out with friends. She had a job. My younger sister just wasn't quite old enough to kind of grasp what was going on. But for me, for some reason, it was this time in which I was just really sensitive to, to the family dynamics and to what was actually happening. And so I think it had a bigger impact on me than it did on them. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just remember in particular, there were a couple of particularly hard times and things that affected me. And I remember when my parents had bought this car. It was a brand new Dodge Durango. It was a really nice car, but it was just a car that they couldn't afford. I distinctly remember knowing that at some point it was going to be repossessed, and we didn't know when. It was just kind of one of those waiting games. finally one day it was just gone. But it was a waiting game for a while, and it was kind of unnerving to know that at some point it's not going to be there anymore. And then realizing, oh, wait, one morning we woke up and it wasn't there. And so, yeah, that was definitely an impactful moment for me. And just kind of the dynamics too around, you can just tell that there's tension, and you can tell, from when I was young, my mom always wanted to stay home with us kids. And it just wasn't possible based on, the way that the financial situation was set up in our family, the way that they were going after their finances and spending money. And they weren't spendthrifts by any means. But when it came to some of those bigger choices, like we talked about, right, when it came to housing and cars, they were buying things that were at the upper echelon of what they could afford. And then one day, my dad lost his job and everything changed. It was like, what? Now we can't afford these things anymore. And you can't predict that kind of stuff. You can't predict that you're going to lose your job, but you can prepare for it. And so it was one of these downward spirals from that point in time that just led to more difficult family relations. And then at the same time, a lot more anxiety in regards to money and then how we power through this.
Yeah, Joel, something you said in there just a second ago is one of the most impactful things I've heard. It's you can't predict when you're going to have a job loss, but you can prepare for it. And that's just such a succinct way of putting something that I have tried to put into words by saying, like, you're always, people, if you don't have savings, you're 30 or 60 days away from complete financial ruin, right? If you do lose your job. So you can't predict it, but you can prepare for it. So yeah, I absolutely love that. And I guess my question for you is, when we go through these moments as kids, we look at our parents and we can either kind of emulate them and do exactly what they do or do the opposite. I imagine certainly you fall into the latter category, but like, how quickly did you start making decisions that maybe set you up for financial success down the road, even if it was at 12 or 13, like saving a couple of bucks? Like, I'd love to hear how quickly this impacted you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, especially at least in regards to, the first thing most kids buy, the first major purchase is a car. And so I started working when I was younger than 14, really mowing lawns and stuff in the neighborhood. And then, I got a job at a fast food joint right across from my high school. And so I was saving up money in order to buy my first car. And I guess part of it was I didn't even realize, that I could potentially buy something that was more than I could afford. I didn't realize that I could buy something with cash I didn't have. And so that was probably a really good thing for me. But the first car that I bought was $1,800. I bought it in cash. And that's kind of always been a mantra for me since then, buying cars in cash. And honestly, too, a lot of people recommend buying cars that are a few years old. And in the financial independence community, it's well known that there are awesome cars that are 10 years old or even older that are almost fully depreciated out. And so, yeah, I think, we know that is a way to achieve financial independence even faster. And so for me, yeah, it was a quick lesson that I learned. It was something that I still didn't have all the tools, though, right? I didn't know, based on the patterns that I'd seen and based on the lack of knowledge, like I didn't know what to do, but I did know that I wanted to be frugal. And I think at times it probably led to a little bit of a miserly mentality that I had going on.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I actually wanted to talk about that a little bit further. And actually, I want to tie it back to, it's funny when Brad talked about that statement that you made, you can't predict it, but you can prepare for it. It's interesting to me that if you're operating from a place of fear, potentially you're just preparing to be fired, right? That is one frame. The slight pivot on that, but it's the same tactics, is instead of preparing to be fired, you're building your escape route and you're planning for financial independence. And it's almost that mindset. Which of those two kind of, I would imagine, helps you thread that line between frugal versus valuist versus being a miser, and then kind of working through what is this operating from a place of fear? And I'm curious with yourself, what did you discover about yourself as you were personally wading through that?
Yeah. So what I saw, first off, in seeing my dad's job loss and then kind of seeing the domino effect that unfolded, was, well, one, the first thing that struck me was I want to do something that I enjoy. I don't know why that hit me so hard, but it was, I'm not going to go out there and get a job that I don't get excited to get out of bed for. And so that was something, for some reason, that hit me quite hard in that. The other side of that, I wanted to have a job I love. And on the other side, I just knew that I had to figure out something in regards to money. I had to find some sort of help. I realized too that quickly I can't spend more than I'm bringing in, and it just honestly it made me decide that I wanted to keep more of the money I made as opposed to buying stuff, because I just saw the image of that Dodge Durango sticking in my head was okay, if I make a decision like that, I can completely sink. I can really make my life a lot harder than it has to be. And so for some reason, it in particular made me want to find a job that I love. And on the other hand, it made me want to really, really pay attention to where my money was going. But like I said, at the same time, I needed to find out how else I could change my finances because, at that moment in time, I just didn't have any tools in my tool belt in order to figure out how to save and invest and do better with my money than just that knee-jerk reaction of hardcore frugality.
Yeah, and Joel, that's what I'm curious about. So you said going for help, right? And that can take a bunch of different avenues potentially. You could find people in your actual life. In a perfect world, your parents, but obviously I know that wasn't the case for me. It certainly does not sound the case for you. You can find other mentors, or you could find websites and blogs and podcasts and radio shows. Where did you go for your financial education?
Yeah, so like I said, it really just started off as this knee-jerk hardcore frugality reaction. And I found myself doing pretty well, just not spending much money. And then ultimately, my second job out of school, I was 22, but it was a job being a producer on the Clark Howard Show, which I still am to this day. It's been those 12 years really of working with Clark that have been this daily crash course in figuring out how to handle money well.
And Joel, what I love about this, and I'm a huge fan of Clark Howard, but this is not the, what's your path to get to financial independence? It's get a job working in radio, right? In fact, although you talked about kind of this frugality aspect, the job that you ended up getting, albeit either your first job or your second one with him, you are making less than $30,000 a year in that capacity, right?
Oh yeah, no, that's totally true. My first job in radio was part-time. I quickly got moved up to full-time, and I quickly found out that even full-time radio producer in a major market paid in the $20,000 range. I think I was getting paid like $23,000 a year. And then, when I first started working for Clark for a long time, I was part-time, making $15 an hour and then moving my way up. But for a lot of years, frugality was essential because I really just wasn't making very much money. And yeah, anybody that wants to pursue a path in radio or media these days, that's going to be kind of commonly what you're going to see. Just the salaries aren't amazing, but you know what? The joy of getting to go to work every day and enjoying what I do, that to me was worth it.
And that right there, that is the setup for this entire episode, because what you did with the income that you were given, with what you had in your tool belt at the time, is you expanded your knowledge base. And I guess we could make 2 points, which maybe we can dive into a little bit further. One is probably the biggest gift that Clark gave you over that duration of time that you worked with him and are working with him was the mindset and maybe the skill set, as opposed to, directly the income that you were earning for the job that you are doing. But 2, you were able to massively move yourself and your family towards financial independence on a relatively, what most people would consider, lower income. I think that's going to be empowering. And I would love for you to walk us through how you did that. And to even make it a little bit easier, set the frame that if most of the cost, if you look at the pie, if everybody's cost, if you look at what makes up that piece of the pie, a large percentage of what people spend on their annual expenses go to home ownership, their car, and food, right? And we know from a car perspective, you had that aspect crushed. But in order to, achieve higher savings rate, you're going to have to do something about the rest of those expenses. What was your path to financial independence, with that income that you had?
Yeah, certainly having your approach to FI changes when you're making less money. So for me, the best thing I had at my disposal was first continuing to be frugal, but then on the other side, funneling my money into investments that I could understand. And so for me, I was, of course, saving in a 401k, getting the company match, right? That kind of thing. But then on top of that, it was, for me, it's been real estate. It's been kind of that knowing my immediate neighborhood, buying real estate that I can understand. And my goal has been to buy a house every 2 years. And so every 2 years, I try to save up another 25% for another down payment. Well, in the beginning, it was only 20% because I was owner occupying those houses. And the first house that I bought, I was renting out a room to a friend. And even the house that we're currently in.
Wait, I want to actually talk. I mean, I think it's gonna be really helpful for our audience to talk about that first house. You said that on a $24,000 a year income, you were able to save up 20% for your first house?
Yeah. Through huge amounts of frugality, working some side gigs, I was able to save up, because when I first started working with Clark, I was also pressure washing in the morning before I'd go into work. So I found this job on Craigslist, making roughly $15 an hour there too, and pressure washing houses. I realized that if I was going to achieve this, I had to grind to a certain extent. I had to increase my income. I had to make some extra moves. And so that was kind of the side hustle that started to accelerate my savings rate so that I could buy that first house.
Joel, did the side hustle coincide with this goal? Did it precede it? Literally put me back in that time.
Yeah, I think part of it coincided with the downturn in real estate. And I realized pretty quickly that this was an opportunity of a lifetime. Obviously, a terrible tragedy for so many people. A lot of people lost their homes. A lot of people lost their jobs in the downturn of last decade. That recession has scarred many people. But I realized, too, that this was kind of a chance for me in order to accelerate my savings rate and funnel it towards investments that I could understand.
Yeah, and Joel, this reminds me of the great Warren Buffett quote where he's talking about taking advantage of these downturns. And like you said, obviously this was calamitous for tens of millions of people, but for you were able to look at this as a potential bright spot. And Buffett said, every decade or so, dark clouds will fill the economic skies and they will briefly rain gold. When downpours of that sort occur, it's imperative that we rush outdoors carrying wash tubs, not teaspoons. And that we will do.
And if I think about inflection points, Brad, you did this wonderful presentation recently talking about inflection points on your journey to FI. I kind of want to take that same principle and apply it to Joel's story. And I'd love you to give us the information for this, Joel. I'm going to go ahead and take a stab here that your entire path to financial independence, one of the most major inflection points was this first deal, this first real estate purchase that you made. And because of that, I want to spend a lot of time talking about this. So I think it's going to be important for our audience just to have an idea. You know, we were talking about a downturn in the market, but actually, like with your specific situation, how much was the sale price for that first home?
Sure. Yeah, that first house was $89,000.
Okay, so we're not talking about a $10,000 house here that was scooped up in a foreclosure. Like there are places in the country that right now you could buy a house for $89,000. Not everywhere, maybe not even in Atlanta currently. I know you're down in Georgia, but there are places all around the country where there are still properties like that. So if you don't mind, I'd love for us to slow down and talk about how long and how you were actually able to save up 20% of that on an income of $24,000 a year. And then what impact did that have on your path to financial independence?
Sure. Yeah. The first house I bought was $89,000. I mean, honestly, it's been one of the main foundations, the main building blocks for me to reach financial independence. That's because it's had this domino-like effect. When I bought it, I was able to bring in a roommate who was paying over 3/4 of the mortgage then, which was obviously instrumentally helpful in just lowering my monthly cost of housing, but then accelerating my savings for the future. And so I realized quickly, well, what if I can replicate this? And that's when I came up with this 2-year rule. If I can buy a house every 2 years, if I can just accelerate and bank that savings, bank the extra, and save that towards another down payment, well, this is something that's highly replicable in my life.
So Joel, on that very first purchase, you essentially saved and scrimped and worked extra jobs for about 2.5 years to save up this down payment and effectively cut your housing costs down to virtually nothing, maybe a quarter of this tiny little mortgage payment. That should give great hope to people out there. They're like, wow, okay, housing costs are my biggest expense, but look at what Joel did on a fairly low salary. Like to me, that is astounding. So I just really wanted to slow down on that. Now, talk me through, okay, where do you go from there? So this first one was owner occupied. You had a roommate and you're saving up for the next 2 years to buy that second house. Where do you personally go? Did you continue living in that first one? Did you move into the next one? Like, talk me through the process of that, because I think a lot of people want to become real estate investors, but sometimes these tiny little details of even like, okay, maybe I need to be owner occupied to get a better mortgage rate or get a lower down payment or something like that. Talk us through those little details, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So actually, what I did next was I purchased another single family home that I ended up moving into, and I rented out that first house. And then I did that again. And so I think that is actually a really good path for a lot of folks. It had kind of a multi-pronged helpful effect for me. First, it kind of helped me understand what being a homeowner was all about and the things I had to fix, things I had to take care of. Also, I understood that particular house really well. I kind of knew the things I needed to fix up. I knew the things that were prone to go wrong with it after living in it for a couple of years. And then it does, like you said, Brad, it does have that effect of lower down payment and lower mortgage rate. So typically you're going to get a half point lower or maybe even a smidge more on your interest rate for your mortgage by buying a house that you are willing to live in yourself. When you're buying as an investor, you're going to pay higher rates of interest and they're going to ask for more money down. So it is kind of an easier way for people to get into the real estate investing game.
I'm actually Googling a smidge right now just to nail that down for our audience. Well, all right. So this is actually awesome, but like this is not the story of single Joel and his path to financial independence, over this period of time. You have, I believe, do you have 3 kids?
A third on the way. So yeah, coming up on 3 soon.
Awesome, man. So you and your wife and your 3 kids, or soon to be 3 kids, you're doing this, you're on this path together as a family. And so I'm curious, like, what was the interplay between house hacking, having a roommate, and then what you're doing now? Like, do you guys have a roommate currently?
So we actually found this awesome house in the same neighborhood, and I like to buy everything within a really small radius. And that's for a few reasons, right? I like to be able to be close to the houses. I like to self-manage. I like to be able to cut the grass if I want to, which I try to do as much as possible for money saving purposes. But yeah, the house that we live in now also gave us the ability to rent out the back space. And so literally just up until last week, for 4.5 years that we've been in this house, we have rented out the back space. And that has, again, accelerated our ability to buy more real estate, to invest more heavily in 401ks and IRAs. And so it's just this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy almost of if you will start, if you'll just get started, that, you know what, a decade down the road, you're going to have a huge sigh of relief at the financial independence that you've been able to build into your own life.
So Joel, I'm curious about kind of like limiting beliefs that a lot of people have of, oh, I could never have a roommate, or I could never, as you said, like rent out this backspace. I have kids, I am successful, or whatever, all these other nonsense things that people come up with that limit them. After living with roommates and renting out spaces in your house, et cetera, for so many years, how was that? Was it ever a hardship? Is it something you would consider doing in the future? Like, was it worth it ultimately?
That's a great question. I think one that a lot of people have. I think a lot of people refuse because that doesn't seem normal, or that's one step too far. I just can't do that. And really, it comes down to what your ultimate goals are. My wife and I, we definitely had to talk about it. We had to come to some decisions on what we were aiming for. And for us, what we wanted was at least the ability for my wife to be able to stay home with our kids. And so the part of our house that we live in is a 2-bedroom, 1 bath. It's pretty small. Our girls share a room. We're having a third. We're going to put 3 in 1 room. And that's abnormal, I think, for most folks. But really, it comes down to the fact that prioritizing real estate investing and then prioritizing having a roommate has just made it actually a really easy move for her to be able to stay at home with the kids. And obviously, that's not for everyone, but that was a choice that we decided to make and that my wife really wanted. And at the same time, still continue to save and invest and build for our future. And if we didn't take on the roommate, it'd be really difficult for us to kind of accomplish both. And so it came down to our goals, and we just decided that's the best thing for us.
That's awesome, man. And I appreciate you taking the time to share your personal journey with that as well as your wife's. I have a couple follow-up questions for you. One is, how far have you been able to take this? Like, so we talked about this first property. How many properties or units do you have now?
Yes, I have a total of 5 doors that I manage now. So that's real estate slang for you newbies out there. But yeah, so I've got 3 single family homes that I rent out and then a duplex as well.
And what level of income does that provide for you that you don't obviously reinvest back into it? How much passive income does that provide?
Yeah, about $20,000 a year in income from those properties, which, for some incredibly ridiculously frugal people could pay all your expenses. For us, we're not quite there, but that's the goal ultimately, is to have real estate fund that for us.
And Joel, with that $20,000, so are you constantly reinvesting? Like, is 5 doors your total number? Are you paying down mortgage? Talk me through what you actually do with that profit.
Sure. Yeah. For me, the idea of paying down my mortgage more quickly just doesn't make sense, right? And there are some people that are more emotional when it comes to money. There are some people that have a tendency to look at the numbers a little bit more specifically. And for me, I've got so many mortgages with ridiculously low interest rates that I would rather funnel that money into saving for another property. And so that's what I have been doing. But now I'm at the point where, as a self-managing landlord, I just don't really have the time to take on more properties. And so for me, I'm kind of not even looking right now at anything when it comes to real estate. And I'm actually taking that money and I'm sticking it more into my IRA and 401ks, just prioritizing an investment that has a lower lift, just something that I don't need to pay attention to nearly as much.
What's so interesting, and I want to circle back to this, is with that first home, we talked about how it took you 2.5 years to save up enough for your first down payment. If you were buying more properties now, how quickly do you think that you could stack on enough to get that next property and that next property? How quickly could you start ramping through those? And I guess I say this in light of the fact that it's a wealth snowball, right?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, the last 2 years, I've bought properties. I bought one in 2018. I bought one in 2017. And so it kind of came to the place where I was working on a line where I thought I could buy a property every year with that 25% down. Because now we really love the home we're in. We're not planning on moving. Although it is a great method, especially to get started. It's not something that we're currently doing. But yeah, I think if I wanted to, I could try to buy a house every year. I have also, by the way, had to look towards neighborhoods that were just a little bit further away from where we currently live, because as prices have gone up, it's changed the neighborhoods that I'm looking at for a couple of reasons. One, there's a lack of affordability where I currently live. And two, there are neighborhoods that I see as on the rise, as having great potential. And I want my money to go into an investment where I think I'm going to see more upside when it comes to appreciation at the same time as presenting some monthly cash flow. So that's kind of what I look at.
Well, let's go a little bit farther with that. So for our audience, someone that is now thinking about picking out their first property, what would be like the 3, maybe 4 things that you would look at to say, this is a good home? This is one that I can get excited about.
Sure. Yeah. I think if you're into quick back of the envelope math, the 1% rule is just an awesome way to approach buying real estate. That's essentially that if you are buying a house that costs $150,000, that you would be able to get $1,500 a month in rent for that property. And so that's kind of the quick math that I use in order to identify whether a property is going to work well for me or not. The other things that you want to consider for sure are, how well do you think a property is going to appreciate over time? And are you able to buy at a deal? Yeah, most real estate investors find that most of their actual appreciation is made on the purchase. And then also through the years, you're hoping that that neighborhood maybe has some upside. I was actively scouting places in Atlanta where I saw more upside. I saw new development. I saw people starting to move and trend towards certain neighborhoods. And that helped me see that this neighborhood is going to have more upside in the future. And so that's kind of what I look like. I look for that 1% rule. I want to see appreciation over time. And I also want to see cash flow. But again, too, this is market specific. And you might be in a market where, for instance, let's say you're in Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma. There might not be a ton of upside appreciation movement. And that 1% rule and that cash flow is what you're banking on. You're banking on just that. So it's very market dependent. There might be other markets where the 1% rule is just laughable. Let's say you're in Denver. Well, it's almost impossible to find a property that's going to meet that 1% rule.
Well, that is the headquarters of Bigger Pockets. Property's not sitting around with a 1% rule for very long.
I know, right? Seriously. Yeah. So you got to pay attention to the individual market factors where you live. But I kind of like to try to prioritize a hodgepodge of all of those things, but your market may vary.
I actually have a question for you just about scale. I mean, you kind of mentioned this. You hit the limits of what you felt like you could accomplish in terms of these individual single families around the area, and they were starting to get more and more spread out. Did you ever consider clustering or trying to scale this method, either by bringing on property management or trying to get, duplexes, tris, quads, maybe a full-on apartment complex, anything like that?
Sure. Yeah, that's kind of where I was moving. And the last purchase that I made was actually a duplex. That's been a really good buy. I've actually really enjoyed getting into the multifamily game. And that's where I would continue to go in all likelihood, would be neighborhoods that have solid, really good looking multifamily housing and running those out, because the numbers typically reflect better on multifamily than they do on single family. And also as an individual investor, if you are buying something and you need a place to live at the same time, if you can live in that multifamily property, man, that's an amazing win-win. I haven't really looked into apartment complexes or getting big, because I do like the idea also of keeping it manageable. I like the idea of self-managing for a lot of reasons. One, you're not paying someone to do something that you could do yourself. And I think that idea of getting a 3 a.m. phone call that the toilet is leaking and water's everywhere is kind of overblown. I don't really get 3 a.m. phone calls, and not to say that it couldn't happen.
No, what you're trying to say is I don't answer 3 a.m. phone calls.
I certainly would let that go to voicemail, right? But it's a little overblown, the difficulty of managing a property. And I think if you have something like I have built in a close proximity where I can easily go by and check on things, after work. I can ride my bike over to most of my properties, which is really helpful. But yeah, I would say that if you can build it like that, then self-managing is a huge win for a lot of reasons. Also, nobody is going to take care of the property that you have purchased better than you would. No one else is going to care about it nearly as much as you do. And at the same time, when I'm shopping for services for people to fix things at my house, well, I have a vested interest in getting the lowest price. Maybe I'd find the best management company that's around and they would do a great job and they would save me money. But I don't know, when it comes to how much I'm spending on repairs at my investment properties, I'm really, really conscious. And I've got a great Rolodex of awesome people that fix things for reasonable prices. And so for me, that's just another reason to kind of manage these properties myself.
And Joel, if you were just starting out, I guess, with real estate, would you stick with the path that you followed? Or would you counsel someone who's just starting out with real estate, start with the single family, do a house hack, if you will? Or, you just mentioned you started looking maybe for economies of scale purposes at multifamilies. Would you advise that? And then also the location. You said initially you looked at the place where you wanted to live, but now you've had to go further afield. If you were starting over again, what would you do today?
Yeah, if I was starting over, my first purchase would be a multifamily. It would be a multifamily that I would live in, and I would have the other units essentially pay for the whole mortgage, if not more than the whole mortgage. That would be my goal. That's what I would seek to achieve. And then once that's the case, you have this ability to rapidly build up savings that you wouldn't have otherwise. So, I think my first single family home was a solid purchase. It's been great. And then having a roommate really did help cover that mortgage, most of the mortgage, and I was able to accelerate my savings. But let's just say if I had bought a triplex, I would have been able to make moves even more quickly. And so I think for most people out there looking, if you can stomach living in a multifamily house, if that's something that you're interested in, I would definitely encourage you in that regard. And then eventually you move out and you buy another single family home or you buy another multifamily home and you kind of rinse and repeat and keep going in that direction. Certainly everyone has their own ideas of an ideal life. They have their own ideas of how they want to pursue real estate. But if you're looking at just kind of the numbers, I think buying multifamily real estate and then living in one of the units is going to be the best way for you to go.
So thank you for sharing. There's so many people that maybe say, man, well, hey, this would have been great if I had started in, 2012 or 2009 or whenever. If I had started 6 or 7 years ago with real estate, then obviously. But now it seems like we're on another tear. And in my personal opinion, you're still subject to the math, right? You should be looking at good identifiers like the 1% rule, like does it cash flow? What's your game plan? Kind of these basics should apply. You shouldn't just buy at any cost. But if the numbers work and you're planning on bringing in a roommate or multi-roommate situation, it seems like you potentially have a lot of leeway. And I wouldn't be surprised if your advice would just be to make sure the math works, but it doesn't have to be perfect. You should just get started. I really want to circle back to Clark Howard because this is amazing, really. Clark Howard is a legend in the money space. He has one of the largest personal finance shows in the country, if not the world. He's been talking about money issues for well over a decade, and probably even closer to 2 decades at this point. And you've been with him for the past 12 years. This had to affect your mindset. It had to affect your path to financial independence. You've kind of laid out for yourself this framework for real estate, but I'm curious, outside of the real estate space, what were your biggest takeaways from 12 years on the Clark Howard Show?
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, Clark's impact on my own life, just his friendship, and then also being in the studio every day while we're doing the show has had an immense impact on my life. It literally is this crash course. And for a lot of years, I was kind of getting up to speed. I was figuring out what basic investing looked like. I was figuring out how to cut costs in little ways. And Clark is kind of really the foremost expert that I know when it comes to cutting your monthly bills, when it comes to figuring out ways to save on your cell phone or your internet or cutting the cord, stuff like that. He really has just so much good advice to give in so many different areas. But yeah, for me, it was this kind of overall mindset shift from being a incredibly frugal person to the point of probably the point of being Scrooge-like at times, which is not good, to this point of realizing, money has a lot of value. Like I don't have to just cling to everything. I can actually use it well. And I can use it well to invest and to care for others. And I think working with Clark also gave me the ability to figure out ways to save that I hadn't thought about before either. Ways to kind of cut back on things that didn't really mean anything to me, And I think that's where some of his best advice comes from too. It is helping people think about money in a completely different way, and then think about their monthly bills in a way that they hadn't thought about before.
What's so interesting is that you didn't just learn that information, but now you are putting it out there to a whole new audience. You and your friend Matt started a podcast, which I started listening to when it first came out, Poor Not Poor. And now you guys are co-host of the How to Money podcast. We got to hear a little bit more about this story, man. Like, how did you guys decide to start the podcast? And then what happened? Like, what were those kind of points in time to move it over and start recording with How to Money?
Yeah. So because of my day job, it was this, you know what, I want to put something out there into the world. And obviously I've learned a million different things from Clark. I owe him the world and I love my day job. But at the same time, I was like, you know what, Clark and I live life really differently. Like, I'm kind of this weird dude who likes to bike everywhere he goes. I've got a cargo bike. I like to put my kids on the back and I like to drive my car as little as possible. I started kind of getting into the financial independence space. And I was like, man, there's so much here too that is just completely different than what we talk about on the Clark Howard Show at my day job. And so I was hanging out with my best buddy, Matt, who lives 6 blocks away from me. Matt one day was like, what do we do every time we get together? And we realized, well, we drink a craft beer and we talk about money. Matt's super into investing and thinking about money too. And so it was the start of this show that we originally called Poor Not Poor. And then we changed the name in November to How to Money, just because Poor Not Poor, it's really hard to it was POUR, like pour a beer, and then don't be poor. And really it was this kind of,
I still have your koozie, by the way.
Oh, nice. Oh, good. Yeah, really the message of Poor Not Poor was meant to be a little cheeky. It was like, pour a beer and let's live a rich life. Like, let's figure out how to live a life that's meaningful. And for Matt and I, craft beer is that thing that we're willing to spend money on, lots of money on, no matter what. That's something that we're not willing to cut out of our life. And I think too, sometimes when we're talking about financial independence, it can be really hard for a lot of folks. They feel like they have to cut out even the things that they love. And so for us, craft beer is something that we're not willing to cut, but we're willing to cut on all these other things that hold very little value in our lives. So yeah, that was kind of the start of the show.
Yeah, Joel, I completely hear you about buying what you value. And craft beer for you guys is it. I suspect also maybe Atlanta United soccer tickets, right?
Oh, most definitely.
Where do you go from here? You're obviously on this 5 path. You have 5 doors, 5 different rental properties. You're still saving a lot of money, I assume. Like, what does your path to 5 look like?
For me, real estate gave me this ability to have income right now, while at the same time also building equity for the future. And so, yeah, I guess right now I'm not nearly as focused on buying more real estate, although in the future I would like to buy more. But I really want to continue to do something that I love every day of my life. I mean, that's really, really important to me. Even if I make less money, that's okay. And if it delays, my path to financial independence, I'm okay with that too. Yeah. So I guess my goal is to continue to do something that I love every single day, but a combination of real estate, 401k, and IRA investments. I mean, that's really what I'm banking on for financial independence. And really, I think if I wanted to, I'm 35 now, I think I could be financially independent and never have to work again at the age of 40. But that also is not something that's set in stone for me, because I might choose to take a mini retirement, or I might choose to focus and spend more money on my side business. But I think the world can be your oyster when you save and invest well over a long period of time. And so, yeah, that's really my goal. It's not a specific date set in stone, but it's just this kind of general approach to life that gives me just massive amounts of breathing room.
Well, Joel, that's perfect. I think that is the perfect place to kind of bring this part of the show home. This is the home stretch here. And honestly, that's it. What does it look like to design a future that you can get excited about, not in your golden years, but now? And it looks like the steps that you made, the somewhat quote unquote extreme steps, right, that you made, have given you a level of freedom that most people have trouble even contemplating. And so I'm excited for you and what it means for you and your family. On most shows, that would be the end of the episode. On this show, we would love to give you the chance to tackle the hot seat. Are you ready for this?
Oh, I'm in.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the Choose FI Hot Seat.
All right, Joel, question number 1, your favorite blog that's not your own.
All right. So since I'm a podcaster, can I go podcast instead, guys?
Oh, love it.
Okay. All right. I really along with 10 million or maybe even more other people, man, I really love Joe Rogan Experience podcast. I certainly don't have enough time in the day to listen to every single one of them or even most of them. But when he interviews really, really interesting people, I can't get enough of it. And he recently interviewed a guy named Colin O'Brady, who pulled a sled across Antarctica over months. And he's the first person to have traveled all the way across Antarctica. And that was just a fascinating interview. I love stuff like that. I love interviews with people doing something unique and different. And so, yeah, I love that show.
Why would you do that? But I respect your right to try.
Blood for punishment, right?
Absolutely. That's awesome, man. Yeah, he hasn't gotten a shout out on this show in maybe ever, but he certainly deserves it. And he does have some fascinating conversations. All right. Question number 2, your favorite article of all time. Now, this also can be a podcast episode if you want, and it can be one that you have done or written, or it can be someone else's.
Yeah, my favorite episode that Matt and I have done at least was a podcast episode where we talked about how everything costs more than you think. It's just this kind of look into secondary costs of how every purchase that we make affects more and more purchases down the line. For instance, like, when you buy that car that costs $10,000 versus the car that costs $3,000, well, that's going to have residual effects on the amount of insurance that you're going to have on that car. You're probably going to have full coverage, whereas on a $3,000 car, you can have liability only. There's just all these other things that you need to factor in when you're making a purchase, as opposed to just that sticker price, the tag on the item itself. And so that's probably, my favorite episode we've done.
Oh, we definitely have to link to that in the show notes. What is the episode number for that?
Yeah, that was episode number 48.
Awesome. We will have it linked in the show notes. All right. Question number 3, your biggest life hack.
Okay. My biggest life hack is to ride your bike more. I have a cargo bike in particular, which some people might wonder what that is. And there are different kinds of cargo bikes, but I'm able to put my 2 girls on the back. I'm able to take my daughter to school every day on the cargo bike. And I have, in particular, I have an electric cargo bike. So it's super fun at the same time. It goes really fast and it kind of zips me up these crazy hills in Atlanta. So I take my daughter to school, I bike into work, and I feel like riding your bike, not only it allows me to not have to go to the gym because I'm able to stay at least moderately fit by riding my bike often. And then at the same time, just drive my car a whole lot less, which reduces your overall car expenditures.
Well, dude, you're going to make all the radio in Atlanta totally obsolete. Like actually tracking the traffic patterns in Atlanta is the state pastime.
That's true. That's like the number one reason that people listen to the radio is because they're stuck in traffic. That's for sure.
That's funny. All right, Joel, question number 4, your biggest financial mistake.
So I think that was thinking that buying cheap stuff was a good idea. Just because something was on sale or quote unquote a good deal, I found myself just that I couldn't hold myself back. I had to buy that item because it would never be that good of a price again. And over the past few years, my mindset has drastically changed that. I'm willing to buy far fewer items and even spend a lot more on certain specific things that are really meaningful to me. And if I had to go back and do it over, I think there were just probably like 12 pairs of jeans in my drawer that I didn't really like or didn't fit well, but I got them because they were like $10 or $12. And so just not buying things only because they're on sale.
All right. And question number 5, the advice you would give your younger self.
I would say to be more generous, because I did have kind of a miserly approach towards money. And I think that negatively impacted some of my relationships. That's not a good way to view money. It's really important to be thankful for what you have and then to be generous with your excess and what you've been given. And so I think if I could go back and do it over, to tell my younger self, I would say be generous earlier with the people around you, in particular, with the people that you care about the most. Don't be miserly with the money that you've been given.
Yeah, don't bring that case of Natty Light when you can upgrade them to craft brew. Come on, man.
Exactly.
All right, Joel, hey, we've got a bonus question. What is the purchase you've made in, let's say, the last year or so that has added the most value to your life?
So I got some Aftershocks bone conduction headphones, and they've been a game changer for me. So bone conduction headphones actually sit on like the temple outside of your ear. And so I'm able to ride my bike, listen to podcasts, listen to music, and still be able to hear the outside world around me, because it's really unsafe to ride your bike with regular headphones. But with these bone conduction headphones, I'm able to kind of get the best of both worlds. And so that's been a major game changer for me.
Nice. My first introduction to those was actually people that used a form of them when they were swimming. And I hadn't thought about it for bike riders as well. So that's a great tip. Joel, this has been awesome. So much value here. And I'm sure there's people listening to this that are going to want to connect with you and want to connect with the content that you've been producing. What is the best way for someone to find out more about your content?
Yeah, sure. People can find my podcast anywhere that they're listening to this podcast. If they just type in How to Money in the search bar, they'll be able to find it and hit the subscribe button. You can also check out our website, howtomoney.com. It's mostly just a podcast. We've got a few articles as well, but yeah, we're focusing on our show right now. And so, yeah, they can find us there.
Thank you so much, Joel, for coming on the show. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It was a lot of fun.
Brad, I'm so excited about actually having this episode. One, Joel is a kindred spirit, and Joel has been helping Clark Howard with the show for the last 10 years. That's the setup. But like once you move past that, you see what his actual value is to our community is so much more than that. This is someone that is pursuing financial independence on a fairly objectively low income, but that isn't even slowing down. He is farther on his path to FI than many people that have had multiples of his income and knew about this information a while back because he hustled and he took action. It's incredible to me that when you're willing to look at the problem a little bit differently, the options that it unlocks for you, especially when it's based on a balance of intentional mindset and frugality.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this reminds me of a quote that I heard on the Tim Ferriss podcast a long while back, which is easy choices, hard life, hard choices, easy life. Joel and his wife, they made the difficult choice of living with roommates and living in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, in essence, half of their house with 2 kids. That's the hard choice. But it's produced this life that they're on this glide path, if you will, to FI because for a number of years, they made those hard choices. And to me, that's just so empowering that if over a short period of time, you can make those hard choices, then everything else gets easier, almost in perpetuity. That's amazing to me.
If you got value from today's episode, and if you've been getting value from the episodes up to this point, just take 1 second and press the subscribe button on the platform you're listening to this on. Just lets the providers know you're getting value from the show and you want to be here when we produce additional content. If you want to support us in what we're doing here at Choose FI, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. To do that, just go to choosefi.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to choosefi.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free and just go to choosefi.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 100. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.